are so many unique monsters and creatures hidden throughout the Resident Evil franchise. Whether they appear in spin-off games that you've never played, or they are minor one-off creatures that are easily forgettable, there are so many unique monsters in the series that us as players might not even know exist. And on this episode of Nerd Space Games, that's exactly what I want to focus on. Before that though, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more ranking videos like this. Also, if you enjoyed today's topic, consider hitting that like button as well. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and this is 10 Resident Evil monsters and enemies that you never knew existed. Let's get it. Number 10, Giant Whip Spider, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Out of all the enemies on this list, Giant Whip Spiders are probably the ones that most players of the franchise have come across but just forgot about them. These creepy giant spiders are based on the real-life spider whip spiders, also known as tailless scorpions. These arachnids are some of the most real-life, terrifying-looking creatures, so of course Resident Evil needed to bring them into its universe. The giant whip spiders pops up in just a few sections of Resident Evil Revelations 2 in both campaigns. These creatures usually appear in swarms, meaning that if the player isn't careful and aware of their surroundings, they could easily become overwhelmed by these obnoxious arachnids. Thankfully, the giant whip spiders are easy to put down, but because of their small size, they could sneak up on you and deal some damage to you before you even see them coming. Because of how little they pop up during the story of Revelations 2, and because of how quick they are to put down, it's easy to miss them and forget about them completely. Number 9, Axeman, aka Aculeozzo, Resident Evil Outbreak. Chances are if you played Resident Evil Outbreak, then you might know this next entry, the Axeman. While nowhere near as popular as Nemesis or Mr. X, the Axeman was one of the earlier versions we got of a stalker enemy. The Axeman is the serial killer persona of a hospital director, Aculeozzo. Al was using the T-virus to test on cancer patients in the hopes of saving his terminally ill wife. After her death, a monster-like plant devoured her body, which led to Aculeozzo going completely insane and creating his new persona, the Axeman. As the Axeman, he believed that his wife became the monster plant. Therefore, in order to keep the plant alive, he began hunting down Raccoon City citizens, killing them, and feeding them to his monster plant wife. Eventually, you as the player come across him and he's virtually unstoppable. He'll continue to chase the players throughout the entire scenario and even has an instant kill attack. Just like with Mr. X and Nemesis, you're able to put him down for a short amount of time, but eventually, he'll get back up and start to search for you again. The Axeman cracks this list because of the lack of players that have played Resident Evil Outbreak due to it not being available except on the original PlayStation 2 or emulators.
So there you are, my dear. My dear Dorothy. I'll never leave your side again.
Number 8, Cows, Resident Evil 4. Okay, hear me out before you guys completely lose it. Yes, I'm sure you've all seen the cows throughout Resident Evil 4. However, did you know these cows in the village section of the games could in a way be considered enemies? Yeah, that's because the cows in this game can actually attack and damage Leon. Of course, you do technically need to give them a little motivation first. Like, I don't know, maybe shanking them a few times will do the trick. What's even cooler and kind of darker and more messed up is that in the remake you can actually set one on fire and set it loose on not just Leon but the other enemies around the village. Hell, the burning cow can even take on the chainsaw enemy in the village, which is kind of hysterical to watch. Give it a shot sometime. All you gotta do is shoot the lantern in the barn where the cow is at and watch it go ballistic on the villagers. Number 7, Glimmer, Resident Evil Dead Aim. So since the only game this creature appeared in is a spin-off that even some of the biggest fans of Resident Evil haven't played, of course it makes a strong case for this list. Now, some of you might confuse this creature with something similar that has appeared in the mainline games, the Lurkers. Lurkers are another variation of the Hunter that appeared in Resident Evil 0. These frog-like monsters pop up randomly throughout the treatment plant and are some of the most dangerous creatures in the game. That's because they have an instant kill attack. The Glimmer takes a lot of similar characteristics from the Lurker with one key difference. The brain of the monster is exposed on the Glimmer. Despite the Lurker having the ability to instantly kill the player, the Glimmer can be a little more obnoxious to deal with, mainly due to the mechanics of the game they appear in, Dead Aim. Unlike most Resident Evil games, Dead Aim switches back and forth between first person and third person. When you aim, the player switches to first person combat. Because of how mobile the Glimmer is, trying to take down these enemies while they are hopping around could prove to be more frustrating than the Lurker's instant kill attack. Ultimately though, the Glimmer isn't talked about much due to its more recognizable cousin, the Lurker, appearing in a mainline entry of the series, while the Glimmer is a one-off monster in a spin-off game that most people haven't played. Number 6, Megabyte, Resident Evil Outbreak. Probably one of the most annoying real-life insects are fleas, but did you know they also appeared in a Resident Evil game? Probably not, since they've only popped up in a spin-off game that's only available on the PlayStation 2. Once again, that is Resident Evil Outbreak. To go one step farther, they also only appeared in one of the scenarios of the game, the Underbelly. In this scenario, you eventually come across giant fleas known as Megabytes. Just like regular fleas, they hop all over the place. Surprisingly, they are pretty massive despite being a mutated form of a very small insect. I mean, they are even bigger than, say, hunters or the chimeras in Resident Evil. And that's just the babies. At the end of the scenario, you come across the Gigabyte, which is even bigger and more dangerous than the Megabytes. Resident Evil has explored multiple insect-like monsters throughout the mainline series, from flies to spiders to cockroaches. But the flea is one of the more obscure monsters hidden in a one-off scenario of a spin-off game that's not available on modern consoles. Number 5, Sliding Worms, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Sliding worms are a little less forgettable since they do pop up in a mainline entry, but for newer gamers trying to play the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, it's easier said than done without emulators and ROMs. Therefore, a creature like this is easily unknown to a lot of Resident Evil fans, especially since the version everybody immediately thinks of is the Gravedigger. Speaking of which, the sliding worms are the spawn of the Gravedigger. Sliding worms are only in a few places in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, all of which the players tend to run by immediately after approaching these creatures because how annoying they are to kill without taking any damage. Granted, the worms by themselves are no problem at all since they only take 1 or 2 handgun bullets to put down. The problem though is that they travel in packs. Therefore, killing them all before they are able to reach you is easier said than done. They move very similar to the adders in the original Resident Evil, where they slither back and forth to dodge incoming attacks. However, they have a leaping ability that allows them to jump towards the player and attach themselves to the player. Overall, even though these creatures pop up in a mainline entry, they crack this list because they are nowhere to be seen in the remake of Resident Evil 3, and because they are easily forgettable thanks to most players running past them. Even fans of the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis who haven't played this game in a while might have forgotten that these guys exist. Number 4, The Cleaners, Resident Evil Survivor. Also known as the Undertakers, the Cleaners were a squad of BOW soldiers that Ark Thomas faced off against in Resident Evil Survivor. These soldiers were some of the first BOWs to wield guns and even understand the English language long enough to take orders from their commanding officer. Obviously, a major reason they pop up on today's list of most obscure monsters in Resident Evil is because they pop up in a game that many Resident Evil fans haven't played, Resident Evil Survivor. The Cleaners were Umbrella's expendables basically, as they were used for some of the most dangerous and low survival rate missions. Usually they were sent on missions that involved destroying important evidence that pointed towards Umbrella's involvement, and most importantly were usually ordered to kill witnesses. As a matter of fact, destroying evidence was so important to the use of these creatures that Umbrella even developed these BOWs to dissolve after death, therefore removing any traces of them existing in the first place. Number 3, Torpedo Kids, Resident Evil Dead Aim. If you saw my video on the weirdest monsters in Resident Evil, then you will probably already know a little about these suicidal monsters. Firstly, they appear in yet another spin-off game that we already talked about, Resident Evil Dead Aim. Unlike the Glimmer though, these guys are a little harder to identify because at first glance, they don't even look like enemies. They look more like, well, they look more like torpedoes. The one and only section you'll come across these little demons is in the waterways of Dead Aim. While running through the sewer-like labyrinth, you'll notice small little splashes of water going in a straight line. Unless you jump in front of them, you'll never even know they exist. With that being said, even if you do jump in front of them, they explode on impact, making you think it's some sort of missile that's hitting you. Follow the path that these creatures are coming from and you'll eventually come across the mother creature, the Noctilus. Only then, you'll finally realize that these guys are actually baby monsters that the Noctilus is using as bullets to kill you. Actually, on closer examination, you'll even notice that they have faces that kind of look like a baby Nemesis. Sadly, you'll never come across these, unique creatures again in the franchise outside of Resident Evil Dead Aim. Number 2, BOW, Resident Evil Gaiden. Okay, I'm sure if you've never played Resident Evil Gaiden, then you're probably thinking, what the hell is he talking about? BOW is the name given to just about every single monster in the Resident Evil universe. Well, in Resident Evil Gaiden, there is a monster that is literally known as BOW. Anyway, this monster makes the list because it's from one of the least played Resident Evil games out there. Like, full disclosure, I've never even played this game. I've researched it, I learned about it, and I know the big twist at the end of it, but I've never played it. That just shows how rare it is for someone to have completed this game. And despite this monster being the main antagonist of the game, it still is one of the least known monsters in the universe thanks to the lack of players that have experienced the full story of Gaiden. Resident Evil Gaiden is a non-canon game that follows Leon Kennedy and Barry Burton as they work together to discover Umbrella's newest secret BOW. Upon investigation, it's revealed that the BOW is a shapeshifter. It takes the forms of different characters throughout the game, but most notably at the end of the game, it takes the form of Leon Kennedy, implying that Leon is dead and has been replaced by a shapeshifting BOW that bleeds green. Step aside, Mother Miranda, there's a new shapeshifter in town. Just because of how unlikely it is that most of you guys have played this game, I almost put this as my number 1 considering that I haven't even played this game. However, I decided to go with a different enemy that is so rare that it pops up in an optional area of a bonus game. Let's check that out. Number 1, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It's from Resident Evil Revelations. But for the sake of my sanity, let's just call this one Yellowfish after one of my favorite restaurants to eat at. So these Yellowfishes are actually pretty rare. So rare that you can only find them in Resident Evil Revelations. Actually, you can't even find them in the main campaign of the game as they only appear in raid mode, and even then, they are usually located in optional areas. So essentially, finding one of these guys is like finding a shiny Pokemon in a Pokemon game. They don't deal a lot of damage, but they do make up for that with their defense. Usually, it'll take a lot of ammo to kill these things, and trust me, you do want to kill them as they'll leave behind a valuable weapon case or custom parts. Anyway, these fish-like enemies are one of the rarest enemies in the Resident Evil series. So much so that if you're not a fan of playing bonus games within older Resident Evil titles, then there is a really solid chance that you've never seen one of these spiky bad boys. Actually, just for fun, hit up the comments and let me know if you've been one of those lucky few that took on this, well, whatever the fuck it is. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think about my number 1 choice for most obscure enemy in a Resident Evil game. Do you agree with Yellowfish taking the cake, or is there a different monster that is so obscure that even I forgot about it? Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one, especially if you love Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and other survival horror content. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.